Mark Zuckerberg arises from his sarcophagus and he says, "Hearken unto me, brothers and sisters, for I've had a vision. I know I told you that your future would consist of arguing with your most racist uncle using the primitive text interface that I invented in my dorm room so that I could non-consensually rate the fuckability of Harvard undergraduates. It turns out that the true future lies in me turning you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low-polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character so that I can imprison you in a virtual world based on a 25-year-old satirical cyberpunk novel that I call the metaverse, and that's it. End stage Enshittification. A pile of shit." So we're taking a bunch of people who do useful things and replacing them with chatbots that can't do those things, and then asking the survivors of the great redundancies to be AI babysitters who try and nurse the whole thing along. Because often AI is just people in low-waged environments pretending to be chatbots, pretending to be robots, or there's some automation, but they're stepping in because the automation fails and fails and fails. You may remember Amazon had these shops, the just walk out shops, where you would walk in and fill your basket and just walk out, and the AI cameras would do it. It wasn't AI cameras. Each camera was being watched by 3 people in an Indian call center, trying to figure out among them which thing you just put in your basket. Fake it until you make it and all, but this is literally like 3 pretend AIs in a trench coat.
Thank you everybody so much for coming. It's really exciting. Our first Nerve event. And Cory is, I'm assuming you know who he is because you're all here. But Cory he's one of the most interesting thinkers around all things internet. I followed him for years. And he's not just a writer, he's an activist, he's a policy wonk, he writes fiction, he writes non-fiction. There is very little that you don't do, Cory, and it's embarrassing for the rest of us, that's all I'll say. But I just want to start. So I've got my own little story about enshittification in a moment, but I think this word, it sums up so much of what we sort of knew, but you've expressed it. Can you explain to us when that word first came to you? Because I understand it involved a TripAdvisor site.
Yeah, it is in some ways the least interesting part of the whole enshittification hypothesis. By the way, it's very nice to be here. I've always admired the Frontline Club. Thank you for hosting me at Nerve. Being the first does mean that for at least a week I'll be the best. So we were on a family holiday in Puerto Rico with my parents and my niece and nephew, and we were staying in a cabin in a cloud forest, and our internet came via microwave internet. And if you know anything about microwave relay, the one thing everyone knows, it doesn't work through clouds. And we were in a cloud forest. And so we would try and figure out where we were going to go into one of the little towns that were a very long way away through a very tough drive to go for dinner. And we go to TripAdvisor and we look it up. And TripAdvisor loads about 75 trackers. And of course, they're stacked in the web page code so that they load before the content loads. And we would time out around tracker number 30. And so you would just get the TripAdvisor logo, which is they send it to you as a vector graphic so it can go in the tab. You just get it as the whole window, just a giant high-res TripAdvisor logo and 15 tabs after 10 minutes. And I was in a fit of pique, and I went on Twitter and I wrote, TripAdvisor is the most enshittified website I've ever used. Has anyone at TripAdvisor ever been on a trip? And a few people did what you just did. They chuckled. There were a few reactions. It was very nice to get. But the business of being a digital rights activist, of getting people to care about tech policy, which is quite abstract and quite technical, until it's not, right? Until everything's on fire and your life is destroyed. So getting people to care about it before then is really a matter of trying to raise the salience through gimmicks, right? Metaphors, similes, framing devices. And it turns out dirty words, right? It turns out that the minor license to vulgarity is the thing that we were lacking to get people to engage with serious questions of tech policy. And I'm here to give you that license. So a year or two later, when I was writing about platform decay, I applied this term that I remembered people chuckling politely to. And it became, along with the analysis, I hope, something that was had legs, as they say, did numbers.
Is it true that the New York Times made you write enshittification?
No, that wasn't me. That was an op-ed writer. So funnily enough, the New York Times, although I've written many op-eds for them, has never asked me to write an op-ed about enshittification. So one of the things about vulgarity is you discover the weird policies that other entities have about vulgarity. So in the United States, anyone who's a George Carlin fan knows that there's 7 words you can't say on the air in the United States. The FCC will ding you, fine you, eventually take away your broadcasting license. Shit is one of them. And so NPR affiliates, they say in poopification and crapification. And then after the Trump swamp monster, Brendan Carr, started going after NPR affiliates and pulled 3 years of underwriting for auditing at the largest of these, KQED in San Francisco, their general counsel said, you can't even call it that. So I did an interview with Alexis Madrigal, late of the Atlantic there, where we just called it The Book That Cannot Be Named. And we read the subtitle and asked people to go look for it in a search engine. But in the New York Times, it turns out that the op-ed writers are not allowed to use vulgarity because they are writing ex cathedra in the voice of the Times, and Salzberger would not have filthy words selling his dainty mouth. But if you are reporting, you can use vulgarity. So when the American Dialect Society made it their word of the year, because they were reporting on the American Dialect Society, they could use the word, but not on the op-ed page.
It must feel good to be back in Britain, right? You can just like chuck it around.
After
just
the
like...
watershed, you can have a reality TV show about people's junk. It's amazing.
We're very proud of that, Cory. Thank you. Welcome to our beautiful country. So on my way, I want to tell you a story about why I arrived here maybe 1 minute after 7. And that was because I made the fatal error, because I was running late, of thinking, I know, I'm going to be decadent. I'm going to order an Uber. And I can see where this is going. And it eventually gave me one. And then it said it was going to be 12 minutes. And I was like, no, I can't. But then I did the thing, was I went to the page to cancel it. But Uber have removed the cancel button.
Oh, wow.
From the main page. So I did find it eventually, but not for, I was ringing the driver.
Right.
And I just thought, the irony of it, that I would think to order an Uber to come to a Cory Doctorow event and then would have my journey totally enshittified. That's so much so that I almost miss it. I mean, feels like a parable for our time.
Well, so first let me say, take an Uber if you need to take an Uber, right? Consumerism is not how you change society. It might make your life a little better at the margins, but you're not going to shop your way out of a monopoly anyway. You're going to recycle your way out of the climate emergency. Make the consumption choices that make sense for you. But if you find yourself spending more than 30 seconds on it, say, I've done enough of this, I'm going to go work for an activist group or a political party, or do something that actually has a chance of making a real difference and not just being a consumption choice. So take an Uber if you want to take an Uber. But you're right, that's a very shitty experience. And what's interesting about it is, of course, Uber used to be pretty good, right? That's how they built up. It wasn't that Uber perfected a mind control ray that made us all decide that we would use them instead of minicabs or whatever. They were good. You went on your phone and you tapped a thing and you could see the car move and it arrived, and it was cheap. It was cheap because there was a venture capitalist, Masayoshi Son. This is the same guy who bought all the promising Web 2.0 startups for Yahoo and then destroyed them. Lately, he did WeWork, and now he's the big man in OpenAI. He's a horrible person. And he took $31 billion from the Saudi royal family through their Vision 2030 fund. This is very funny. They're like, what's better than 2020 vision? 2030 vision. Never asked an optometrist whether this was in fact true. So he took $31 billion from them, and then he lit it on fire. They lost 41 cents on every dollar that they brought in. $31 billion. Or 13 billion. No, 31 billion over 13 years that they lost. They provoked a lost decade in transit investment all over the world. They drove out all the livery cabs and minicabs. They prevented new market entry, and where they couldn't, they just bought those new market entrants in defiance of the black letter of competition law, because we don't enforce that anymore. And then once they had captured the market, they did what platforms do if they stop being helpers and start being gatekeepers. They squeeze the drivers who are getting paid half as much. They double the fares, and then they stop caring about whether you had a horrible ride. They took the cancel button away. Any of you who ever watched old Saturday Night Live will remember Lily Tomlin used to do these ads where she would pretend to be an AT&T operator doing adverts for the Bell system. And they would always end with her turning to the camera and saying, we don't care. We don't have to. We're the phone company, right? Everyone who's ever done business with BT Openreach knows exactly what I mean here, right? It turns out that when you withdraw discipline from firms, when they don't face consequence for being bad to you, And when you reward them for doing bad things occur. This is a thing that is facially obvious to everyone except for the policymakers who deliberately set out in living memory to take on board policies that they were warned at the time would lead to this, did it anyway, and created the Enshittigenic policy environment that gave rise to the Enshitticene.
I feel like I have to hold you there. Can you just repeat that? The
Enshittigenic policy environment. Right. So, those of you who are hep to the kids will know the galaxy brain meme, 3 panels, little brain, middle brain, the middle-sized brain, giant brain, 3 different explanations. So the little brain explanation is, oh, you shopped incorrectly. You forgot that if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. Never mind that you can give Apple £1,000 for your distraction rectangle. And sure, they will stop Facebook from spying on you, but then they'll spy on you to power their own ad targeting network, because the thing that determines whether you're the product is whether they can get away with treating you like that. So that's step 1. Did you shop your way out of a monopoly? No. Little brain. Medium brain. Zucker-Muskian ketamine-addled failures are running all of our social media and technology sites, and they're awful people, and that's why things are bad. And there's some truth to this. They are awful people, first against the wall, etc., etc. But they're only doing that because they're the people who are filling the hole in the policy environment created by policymakers, right? If Elon Musk pops his clogs tonight, ketamine overdose, very tragic, right? Overnight, there will be a succession battle among 10 equally horrible big balls, and whoever emerges victorious will be indistinguishable from him. Because this is not a matter of Elon Musk's personality failures. This is a matter of the policy environment that makes sure that someone like Elon Musk will succeed.
It's like the opposite of the great man of the internet theory, I suppose, is what you're saying.
The terrible policy, the terrible Mandelson of the internet.
So I guess, you encapsulated with this word, this feeling that we all experience, our frustration with using these different sites. Mm-hmm. Can you just explain a capsule description of how you see the enshittification sort of parabola?
So enshittification, it's got 2 parts, right? One is a kind of observation about the course of platform decay, and the other is a theory about why. And I'm just expounded on that theory a little about this withdrawal of discipline. But the course of platform decay is very characteristic, and it is characteristic of what you would do if you were a middleman, an intermediary. It's not bad in and of itself. Most of us can't do everything, and even if we can, we have better things to do. We want to have people do bits of it for us. Maybe you are so Linux that you can gnaw a web server out of a whole log with your own teeth. But most of us don't want to do that, right? So you want to get this stuff from other people, your payment processing and so on. So it's what happens when these helpers become gatekeepers, become so powerful that they usurp the relationship they're supposed to be facilitating. And it follows a characteristic pattern. I like to use Facebook to describe it, partly because Mark Zuckerberg's a creep, but also because they're really patient zero, and they're a perfect prototype case. So at the start of enshittification, step 1, a platform is good to end users and finds a way to lock them in. And with Facebook, they open up to the general public and they say, look, I know all of you have an account on MySpace, but I'm not sure if you know this. MySpace, it's owned by an evil, crapulent, senescent, immortal vampire Australian billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, who spies on you with every hour that God sends. And nobody should use social media owned by a billionaire who spies on you, right? So come use Facebook. We'll never spy on you. We'll just show you the things you asked to see. And so we pile in and then we lock in. And the way that we lock in on social media, it's different from other kinds of platforms. It's not like Uber cornering the market and then putting all the other cab companies out of business. On social media, we do it through something called the collective action problem. That's an economist term, but you know it as your 6 mates in your group chat are your best friends and you love them dearly, but they're a giant pain in the ass and you can't even agree on what board game you're going to play this weekend, much less when it's time to leave Facebook. And you multiply that by the fact that one of them is there because that's where the people who have the same rare disease are. And another one is there because they emigrated and that's where the people they left behind hang out. And another one is there because that's where they meet their customers or their audience. And someone's there because, their kid's in a football league and they organize the carpool with the other parents there. And so you don't just have to convince them to leave. They have to convince everyone else to leave. And so you get locked in. That's stage 1. Good to the end users, lock them in. Stage 2, now that the users are locked in, you can turn the screws on them in order to tempt in business customers. So they go to the advertisers and they say, do you remember we told these numpties we weren't going to spy on them? Obviously a lie. We spy on them from asshole to appetite. Give us a remarkably small amount of money and we will target ads to them with exquisite fidelity. And because we are so dedicated to our craft, we filled a building full of engineers who are going to do nothing but fight ad fraud. You give us £1 to show a user an ad, we will stuff that ad in that user's face and you'll know it'll arrive, right? And then they go to the publishers and they say, you remember we told them we would only show them the things they asked to see? Lying about that, obviously. Put excerpts from your website on Facebook, add a link back to your own site, and we'll just like cram it into the eyeballs who never asked to people who never asked to see it. And some of them will click your link and that's your free traffic funnel. So the advertisers, the publishers, they pile in and they get locked in too, because it turns out that it's much easier to lock in a customer or a supplier than it is to lock in a customer, right? If there's 5 coffee shops on your block and one of them goes out of business, well, that's sad, but you've got 4 other coffee shops. But if you're one of those coffee shops and the building next door is 20% of your business because it's an office block and they go out of business and your receipts drop by 20% overnight, that's it. Right? You can't make the payment on the loans for the espresso machine. You can't make payroll. You better hope the landlord's going to give you rent relief. So monopsony, which is the corollary of monopoly, it's the one we don't know about because no one ever made a board game that you're forced to play with your family until you want to kill them and yourself about it. Monopsony is much more durable and easily attained than monopoly. So they lock in the business customers too. And then they turn the screws to them, right? It's not a conspiracy between Facebook and advertisers to screw us. It's a conspiracy among Facebook and its investors to screw everyone. And so targeting fidelity goes way down, ad prices go way up, ad fraud explodes. Procter & Gamble in 2017 zeroed out a $200 million per year surveillance advertising budget. They call it programmatic advertising. Their sales dropped by 0%. Because to a first approximation, no one saw the ads. $200 million flushed straight down the fraud hole. Publishers, meanwhile, find that you got to put not just an excerpt to reach even your own subscribers, you got to put the whole article. And woe betide the publisher that adds a link because that might be a malicious link and no one's going to see it. So it's not a traffic funnel anymore. It's a substitute for your own website. And the only way you can monetize it is with that shitty ad market. So now we're in the final stage of enshittification, this brittle equilibrium where all the value has been withdrawn except for the least that's needed to keep us locked to it. So we load our feed and what we see when we go there is a kind of homeopathic residue of the things we've asked to see. And then the void is filled with stuff that people are paying to show us, but they're all being robbed for billions of dollars. And then this is like the equilibrium they're hoping for, right? All the value is transferred to shareholders and executives, but it's brittle because the difference between I hate Facebook, but I can't seem to stop using it, and I hate Facebook, I'm never going to use it again. All it takes is like one giant privacy scandal and people bolt for the exits. And then shareholders get worried that maybe this is the end of the ride. The share price takes a big dip. And then the people who run the platform, they panic. But being technical people, they have a technical term for this. They call it pivoting. And so it is that one day Mark Zuckerberg arises from his sarcophagus and he says, hearken unto me, brothers and sisters, for I've had a vision. I know I told you that your future would consist of arguing with your most racist uncle using the primitive text interface that I invented in my dorm room so that I could non-consensually rate the fuckability of Harvard undergraduates. However, it turns out that the true future lies in me turning you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low-polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character so that I can imprison you in a virtual world based on a 25-year-old satirical cyberpunk novel that I call the metaverse. And that's it. End stage enshittification. A pile of shit.
Have a glass of water, Cory. That was amazing. So I have some sad news for you. I don't know if you have breaking news alerts on your phone. And if you glance at your phone...
This is the meta case.
So there's some sad news here because Cory is in the cures for the enshittification. Regulation is one of them.
Yeah.
Anti-monopolist lawsuits are another. And so there's been a big case which has been being fought in the US. The FTC took an anti-monopolist case against Facebook for its acquisition of Instagram and WhatsApp, which is in many ways the root of all evil. Mm-hmm. And we just found out tonight that Facebook has seemed to have
won the case.
Won the case.
Yeah.
So
You know,
Yeah, to give me your live reaction to
so
that
look,
news.
I mentioned before that the enshittigenic policy environment is the product of specific decisions taken by named individuals in living memory. And one of them was the decision not to enforce anti-monopoly law. You know, we live in a world dominated by cartels and monopolies. Every sector of the economy globally is dominated by 5 or fewer firms. It's true of vitamin C, glass bottles, sterile bags of saline, intermodal shipping, and professional wrestling. It doesn't matter. They all look like that. The web is 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. And the economists who are responsible for this, they will tell you that it's teleological. The great forces of history have come to bear on this moment. There has been the iron laws of economics coming to fruition, returns to scale. It's nonsense. What happened was 45 years ago, the economists so beloved of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney and Augusto Pinochet and Helmut Kohl, they said monopolies are good and we should stop enforcing anti-monopoly law. Monopolies are efficient. The only time you can get a monopoly is if you please everyone so much that they only buy your products to the exclusion of everyone else's. What a perverse thing to use public resources to punish someone for being so pleasing to everyone else. And so we stopped enforcing anti-monopoly law. And, you know, when you corner these economists and you say, put down that fake Nobel Prize and talk to me like an adult, and you say you're responsible for this, they say, how can you blame me for this? Right? Yes, I counseled you not to enforce anti-monopoly law, but how do we know that's why we have monopolies? It's like we used to put down rat poison and not have a rat problem. And then we stopped putting down the rat poison because they told us not to, and now rats are eating our faces off, and they're like, why are you blaming me? Right? Maybe this is just the time of the rat. Right? Maybe sunspots have made rats more fecund than at any time in human history. And I'll admit it's true, the rats did buy the rat poison factories and shut them all down. But we're not using rat poison anymore. That's just economically rational. And so for 40 years, we have had this painstaking erection of an edifice of precedent and legal doctrine that says that monopolies are good and the statutes should be ignored. And I think that's what we're seeing the expression of. 40% of the US federal judiciary went through a continuing education program called the MANN seminars, M-A-N-N-E. So judges have to go through continuing ed just like doctors and other kinds of professionals. They have to spend a certain amount of time on a course every year. The MANN seminars was a fully paid junket at a 5-star hotel in Florida that 40% of the US judiciary went to, where all you would do is go and learn how the Chicago School economics of antitrust were good. And those judges, empirically, you can see that their outcomes changed. And so you don't even have to be a graduate of a MANN seminar at this point to rule this way, because when you look on the precedent that your peers have made, you find out that the correct way of interpreting the law is that meta is innocent. So here's the thing. The people who said that monopolies were good actually said that there's one kind of bad monopoly, but we're not sure it exists. It's the monopoly where someone sets out to make a monopoly and is successful in doing so, right? If they intend to make a monopoly. This is a very convenient doctrine if you never want to take any action, because you can only take action if you know someone else's intent, which is very hard to know unless that person is Mark Zuckerberg, who's never had a kind of hint of criminal intent that he didn't immediately commit to writing. So when Zuckerberg was buying Instagram, his CFO sent him an email and said, Mark, why are we spending $1 billion on a company with only 12 employees? And he wrote back and he said, because they like Instagram better than Facebook. And when they leave Facebook, they go to Instagram, they don't come back again. We'll recapture those users by buying Instagram. This is as close as you get to an email that says, hey, Bob, you know that guy we were thinking of killing? Just so you know, it's a murder and I'm premeditating it. But both the commission and Obama's FTC waved that merger through. And so if they were going to wave that merger through, I think it would be unreasonable to expect a judge to say, no, you got it wrong. But the thing to remember here is that the origin of antitrust law is in the farmers' rebellions of the 1890 against the rail barons. And the first antitrust law was passed after Senator John Sherman, brother of Tecumseh Sherman, guy who burned Atlanta. He stumped for it and got it passed. And that was 1890, but it wasn't until 1912 that we finally broke up Standard Oil. So we don't need to expect this to happen overnight. It's a long trip. The reason that anti-monopoly law in its traditional interpretation blocks the creation of monopolies rather than responding to monopolies once we discover them in the wild is that it's very hard to break up a monopoly because they're powerful, right? When IBM was sued by the Department of Justice in 1970, They stayed in court until 1982, 12 years. They called it Antitrust's Vietnam. And every year for 12 consecutive years, IBM spent more on lawyers to fight the Department of Justice Antitrust Division than all the lawyers in the Department of Antitrust Division spent were drawing in payroll. They outspent the US government for 12 consecutive years. Right? That's why you punish monopolies while they're forming instead of waiting until they form. And so here we are, we're at this moment. In Eastern Canada, like all the best Americans, I'm Canadian, they have a joke whose punchline goes, if you wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here. I mean, it's true, but this is where we are, and so we got to play the ball where it lies.
So can I ask you though, because you've come up with a sort of a very rational critique of what's happening, but at the same time, it's a big decision. It's a lot of your career has been around expounding the reasons why we need to break up these monopolies and the downstream effects if we don't. You're now living in America. You are witnessing in real time the Trump administration and also the alliance that we're seeing between him and between these tech companies. Do you have an emotional reaction to what is happening here?
I mean, I thought I couldn't be any angrier. It turns out I was wrong, right? But also, I'm an activist, which means that when I'm angry and frustrated, I try to figure out what to do next. And I do think that Trump is weirdly building the case for what we should do next. He is the strange silver lining to his own dark cloud. So for 25 years, the U.S. Trade Representative has made it their top priority to convince every policymaker in the world to adopt a law called anti-circumvention law. And this is a law that prohibits people from modifying the technology they use, even if it's in a device that they own themselves, and even if it's for a lawful purpose. So you can't, for example, reverse engineer a phone to put privacy blockers in it. You can do it with a browser because there's no reverse engineering involved, but you can't do it with a phone because of anti-circumvention law. It came into Europe through Article 6 of the Copyright Directive in 2001. Canada did it in 2012 with the Copyright Modernization Act. Everywhere around the world, we have a law like this. It protects the monopoly rents of tech firms. It's what stops you from adding privacy tools. It's what stops you from adding a third-party app store. It's what stops you from plugging something into Amazon that when you search for something, it tells you whether there's a local merchant that has it instead of Amazon, right? That reverse engineering is per se unlawful because of these bad decisions we took. So you might ask yourself, why would a country voluntarily sign up to put their own tech sector in chains and allow an American tech firm to extract these privacy and cash rents from their own population? Well, it's because the U.S. Trade Representative said, if you don't do this, we're going to hit you with tariffs. Well, happy Liberation Day. Right? The case for tariffs is pretty much dead. If someone says, do as I tell you, or I'm going to burn your house down, and you do it and they burn your house down, you are just a sucker if you keep doing it. So there is a large constituency building, and it can be anywhere in the world that eventually breaks and says, we're going to raid the multi-billion-dollar, centabillion-dollar margins that individual firms take. Apple alone takes $100 billion a year out of the fees they take for app payments. Every time you give a pound to a media outlet for their news, 30p gets lodged in Cupertino, never to emerge, except to briefly make an appearance somewhere over the Irish Sea so Apple can pretend that it's tax-free, right? The only thing that stops us from making a different app store, from like going into the big Tesco and there being a dongle in the checkout aisle that you plug into your phone and installs a different app store, is our decision not to allow circumvention. The country that allows circumvention, they get to be like Finland and Nokia, except they don't have to pay to make the phones. They just get to cream off the service revenue with none of the capital expenditure associated with phones. As Jeff Bezos said when he started the company, your margin is my opportunity. So I look at this and I think there's probably some billionaire on trillionaire violence to be ginned up here, right? From people who want to, invest in potentially very profitable businesses whose success factor isn't determined by how many Trump coin you buy. And then you add to that Trump's dramatic, incontinent belligerence on the geopolitical stage, where the minute the International Criminal Court swears out a genocide warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu, he takes away their outlook. He gets Microsoft to shut down their digital services so they lose their email, their working files, their calendars, their phone logs, their address book. So every policymaker is like, Jesus Christ, we have got to get our shit off of American platforms. Just like a few years ago, it was like, Jesus Christ, we've got to get off Russian gas, right? And so this is very urgent, but good luck to you. You build the open source platform. That's great. It looks just like Outlook, except it's running on European metal and we can see the source code. Fine, but no one's going to copy and paste 1 million documents out of their ministry and their Outlook account into the Euro stack. You need to jailbreak stuff. You need to make it legal to reverse engineer things. So you combine national security hawks with privacy advocates, consumer advocates, labor advocates, with people who would like to do some industrial policy and liberate some consumer surplus. I think you get an unbeatable coalition, and we just need one country to break, and then everyone else gets to buy their products, which I think is our way out of this.
Well, you're saying those words here in Britain, where we have an allegedly progressive government.
I've heard that.
I mean, that was the rumor. And this government has done a series of enormous deals with US tech firms in which they're seeking to replace the infrastructure of the state with the infrastructure of these private Silicon Valley companies. Cory, does this strike you as a good idea?
You know, it's very bad. It's very, let me tell you my favorite, which is to say most enervating example. So there's a lovely fella, ex of The Guardian, Ben Goldacre at Jesus College at Oxford. He's an evidence-based medicine specialist. And he and his colleagues in the run-up to the pandemic happened to just happened to be working on a way to do research on NHS records that is privacy preserving. So the deal was they built a server called a trusted research environment. And you go in and you publish the source code for it, you publish the configuration files. Anyone can make sure that it's doing what it says it does. And then that server can send messages to all the NHS trusts. So you as a researcher, you want to ask something of the data. What's the correlation between these two factors? You write a program, a database query. You put it on Git server so everyone can see it. You make sure that it's a robust research question. They run it on the trusted research environment. It asks all of the NHS trusts to evaluate the connection between these different factors and tell you the connection without ever exposing you to the data of patients in the NHS. So this is a great privacy preserving tool. It's so good, they had about 60 peer-reviewed papers, including several in Nature, in the first 2 months of the pandemic. Right? It was an incredible research tool. So good HMG commissioned Ben to write a 400-page report, the Goldacre report. It's a banger. You should read it. Just print it out and keep it next to the loo. And it explains how this could be rolled out nationally and on a permanent basis. And it's one of the most amazing, low-cost, privacy-preserving, life-saving, medical insight delivering tools we can imagine. So does anyone know who got the contract for the NHS electronic health records? No. Palantir, thank you very much. Palantir, 300 million. Google had it last time. That's what Ben was responding to because they made such a mess of it. I was like, what can we do that's better than Google? So
for £1, because they offered their services for £1.
Yeah.
And the UK government thought, great bargain.
Yeah, someone who's never met a drug dealer, right? Oh, you're saying the first taste is free? Huh. I mean, I guess we know that
he's a lovely guy, Peter Thiel. I mean, is he one of your favorites? I mean, it's hard, I guess, to pick a favorite.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I like about Peter Thiel. He just sold all his AI stock. Well, his NVIDIA stock anyway.
Well, so this is actually, I wanted to get onto this. So I was sort of writing over the weekend because it really struck me that in my sort of tech skeptic circles, it's been common sort of chat for a very long time that AI is a bubble and it's going to have to collapse. And also generative AI doesn't really work in any case, and it's never going to get to advanced intelligence. And this sort of, in Britain, this discourse hadn't been in the mainstream at all until this morning, when it suddenly went to the top of the headlines because the BBC interviewed Sundar Pichai of Google, who said out loud, yes, AI is a bubble. Yes, it's going to crash. Every company is going to be affected. And also check your work because it doesn't really work very well. So, which is quite punchy statements, one would argue. But then I looked this morning, and of course, Cory, you wrote a brilliant essay, it turned out, a couple of months, I think back in October, and you call it the Great AI Apocalypse, which is coming. So do you want to cheer us all up with your thoughts over this?
Well, so look, let's talk first about the economic fundamentals here, and keeping in mind the foundation of finance, something called Stein's Law, which goes anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. And so AI, you have a total capital expenditure in the $600 to $700 billion range thus far. Another trillion committed, supposedly, if they can find suckers for it. The total revenue for AI, right, globally, all the AI companies combined, they claim is 60 billion. That's a very large number compared to what's probably real. So at least 10 billion of it, for example, is the 10 billion that Microsoft gave to OpenAI and OpenAI gave back to Microsoft. That's not revenue. I never got my CPA, but that's not revenue. This is like you're walking down the high street and there's someone in a green apron handing out vouchers for lattes outside of Starbucks. And you take one, you bring it into Starbucks and you give it to them and they give you a latte and they announce that they've made £7. That is not how revenue works, not even if it's $10 billion. So $50 billion max, $600, $700 billion capex. So how long do they have to turn a $50 billion annual revenue into enough money to recoup that capex and start making a profit? Well, they claim that they can depreciate their assets over 5 years. It's been a long time since I did maths, but I think 50 times 5 is less than 600. But that's probably an overestimate as well, because if you ask them, they'll tell you that they sweat the assets so hard that those GPUs are burning out in 2 to 3 years. That's how long they really have to recoup. And then the 7 companies that are like 31 to 33% of the S&P 500, which is to say the American stock market, they're just passing around the same $100 billion IOU and pretending it's revenue. Anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. So buckle up, 31% of the economy is about to be vaporized. It's going to be bad. It's going to make 2008 look like a great year.
Do you think, so, and you just mentioned, so Peter Thiel, because this seemed to be quite significant, that yesterday he sold all of his 100 million stock of NVIDIA, which is the chip manufacturer who's right there at the sort of the center of the bubble, this company which is supposedly worth $5 trillion.
Yeah.
So you took that as a bit of a sign, did you?
I think that's quite a sign. But then I want to talk about the material consequences beyond the economic ones. So, AI can't do your job, but your boss is endlessly horny for firing you and replacing you with a chatbot, which means that when the salesman comes and tries to convince him to fire you and replace you with the AI, he will happily do so even though the AI can't do your job. So we're taking a bunch of people who do useful things and replacing them with chatbots that can't do those things, and then asking the survivors of the great redundancies to be AI babysitters who try and nurse the whole thing along. Sometimes the AI isn't even an AI. I'm on a list from the 1990s for Indian techies that I joined. I don't even remember how I got on it, but I've been on it for so long that I've got all these friends across the ocean. And their joke is that AI stands for either absent Indians or ChatGPT stands for Gujarati people typing. Because often AI is just people in low-waged environments pretending to be chatbots, pretending to be robots, or there's some automation, but they're stepping in because the automation fails and fails and fails. You may remember Amazon had these shops, the just walk out shops, where you would walk in and fill your basket and just walk out, and the AI cameras would do it. It wasn't AI cameras. Each camera was being watched by 3 people in an Indian call center trying to figure out among them which thing you just put in your basket. Fake it until you make it and all, but this is literally like 3 pretend AIs in a trench coat. So, the only thing that is worse than firing people who do an important job and replacing them with a chatbot that doesn't do their job very well is then having all those chatbots switched off. And it's not like you can find those people again. They've become discouraged, they've retrained, they've changed, they've moved to another industry, they've retired. And so now you just have nothing. Right? So it's not just that we're going to have this AI apocalypse. It's that AI is like the asbestos we're shoveling into our walls, right? And our generations are going to be digging it out, or our descendants are going to be digging out for generations.
So, and just to put it into layman's terms, so this AI apocalypse, which you're talking about, a financial meltdown, the collapse of the US economy, is that going to be bad?
Yeah, it's going to be very bad. It's going to be very, very bad. There is like a kind of silver lining-ish. So, there's 2 kinds of bubbles, right? There's the bubble that it just leaves nothing behind, and there's the bubble that leaves behind a productive residue. All bubbles are bad. Let's be clear, right? The way that you make a bubble is you get a bunch of insiders who gin up interest in a thing that isn't real or can't perform to the way that they claim it will. and then they lure in just normie investors who want to make sure that once they're pensioners, they don't freeze to death, and they give them all of their money, and then they steal the money. That's what a bubble is, right? We think of it as like a mania. Foundationally, that's what a bubble is: stealing money from people who don't want to freeze or starve to death when they're old. And some bubbles, though, leave behind salvage. So if you're of a certain age and you paid attention to American economics, you remember two companies that were at the center of gigantic frauds. One was called Enron, and it left behind nothing. They were pretend energy traders. The CEO died before he could serve his prison sentence. The other was called WorldCom. That CEO actually did die in prison. They pretended that there was a lot of demand for fiber, and there was they put a lot of fiber in the ground that no one wanted, but and they stole a lot of money from normies. And it was a fraud, and that guy can roast in hell. But the fiber is still in the ground, right? I live just outside of Los Angeles in a city called Burbank, and I have 2 gigabit symmetrical fiber from, of all companies, AT&T. And the way that I got it is they bought some old WorldCom fiber and turned it on, right? So that asset is still there. It's a productive asset. So let's look at the 2 bubbles that we're going through right now. We have cryptocurrency, right? And all cryptocurrency is going to leave behind is like shitty Austrian economics and worse monkey JPEGs. And then we have AI, and AI is going to leave behind some stuff, right? AI is going to leave behind a bunch of GPUs at 10p on the pound, right? It's going to leave behind a bunch of applied statisticians who are suddenly looking for work. And it's going to leave behind a bunch of open source models that these companies have made as loss leaders and calling cards that have barely been optimized, that still have so much room for improvement. Because if you're an AI company, and the way you're trying to demonstrate to these like credulous investors at big funds that you are serious about what you're doing, is you spend as much money as possible, because they don't understand the technology, but they're like, well, if the pile of shit is big enough, there has to be a pony underneath it somewhere. And so these firms have no incentive to be efficient users of resources. So it's already the case that these open source models can do a lot of impressive things. They're pretty cool. And we'll probably make them do even more impressive things on commodity hardware at the margin. If there wasn't a bubble around AI, right? If we were still where we were like 10 years ago with DeepMind, 15 years ago, 10 years ago with DeepMind, we would just call most of these things plugins. And we go, oh yeah, that's cool. That video editing plugin, that image editing plugin, that text generation or summary plugin, that transcription plugin, that's good. It doesn't work all the time. What plugin works every time, right? It's just fine. It's only because they said, well, first of all, we need $1 trillion for it. Second of all, we're not sure, but we think we might be making God. And if we're lucky, it won't turn us all into paper clips, right? And this is a genuinely, speaking as a science fiction writer, a really stupid idea, right? The idea that if you keep teaching the word guessing program more words, it will wake up, is like the idea that if you keep breeding horses to run faster and faster, one of them will give birth to a locomotive, right? Humans aren't word guessing programs that know more words than the other word guessing programs. So this ridiculous notion and all of the associated foofara has turned what would otherwise be a series of sensible utilities that we would make some progress with over the years to come into this thing that actually threatens the planet, not because we're making God, but because we're destroying the economy.
So I'm going to go to the audience in a moment for some questions, but I've just got one more question, which I'd like to ask you, which is a sort of a bit of a bugbear of mine. So as we said earlier, we are the refugees from the Guardian Observer after they decided to leave our newspaper out by the side of the road to be picked up for spare parts. And not that we're bitter. But one of the things which most upset me about what the Guardian was doing right before we left was its deals with some of the worst companies on the planet. And in particular, it was a syndication deal with OpenAI that it's entered into, and which the Financial Times has also entered into, as opposed to the New York Times, which is suing OpenAI because it believes that it stole all of its work without asking for its permission and has now baked those into its models. So I'm just wondering, do you think that's a good idea for news organizations which are reporting on these companies to go into business relationships with these same companies?
So that's obviously a bad idea, but I'm about to say something you're going to disagree with, and probably most of the people in this room are going to disagree with. So, and it's in two parts. The first part is I don't think that it is a copyright infringement to train models.
I know you were
And
going to say
the
that.
second thing I'm going to say is that even if it were, I don't think it would solve our problems, but there are things we can do to solve the problems.
But so that aside, because you have got some pretty punchy views, which you've always
Sure.
had, right, on copyright,
Yeah.
which is you don't fundamentally agree with it, do you?
No, I think it's fine as industrial policy, but I think it should be designed to serve creative workers, and that mostly what it does is serve our bosses.
But I guess going back to the thing about news organizations getting into
Yeah, no. Well, and this was the problem in in Canada, they tried this thing, the news bargaining code, where they said, okay, well, if you want to link to the news or have a place where you can talk about the news, you have to get permission and pay for a license. It fundamentally misunderstands what the relationship of the media to the tech platforms is and what they're stealing. Giving people a place to find the news and talk about the news is not bad for the news. News you're not allowed to find or talk about is a secret, right? So it's not bad for the news to have a place place to find it and talk about it. What do they steal from the news? Well, they steal 30p in every pound from your subscription dollars in an app, right? That's a big one. Or advertising, right? 51p in every advertising pound is taken by the intermediaries in the ad tech sector. So historically, everyone who was an intermediary in ad tech, everyone who was an advertiser or a publisher, took 15% in aggregate, right? Don Draper and all his pals, 15%. Google, Facebook, 51%. How did they get that 51%? Well, in ad tech, you have a seller side platform, a buyer side platform, a marketplace in the middle. So the seller side platform is like, I'm a website and I've got an 18 to 34-year-old man-child from Zone 4 who owns an Xbox and has been recently looking up information about gonorrhea, who wants to advertise to him. And down here you have the advertisers who are bidding to show that person an ad, and here in the marketplace you have where it all happens. Well, they've rigged it so you have to use their sell side, buy side, and marketplace, which they also use because they're also both advertisers and publishers, right? And so this is like you and your partner go to get a divorce, you get to court, you find out you both have the same lawyer. Well, that's bad, but it turns out that that lawyer is putting on a wig and they're the judge. And then you go up to the bench and they're trying to match with both of you on Tinder. And then they bang the gavel and they figured out who gets the house. It's not you, it's not your partner, it's them. Right? It's not a mystery how you end up with that relationship. So when we decided that the thing that tech platforms were stealing from the news was talking about the news and finding the news and not money, not, for example, the charges that they charge you to reach your own subscribers on social media who've asked to see the things you post, where you still have to pay to boost to reach them, then we put the media companies in bed with the tech companies. We said, we're not going to do pre-distribution where we're going to force you to stop stealing money from us. We're going to do redistribution. We're going to make you give some of it back, which means that we only get money back when you make money, which means that we're now in the same business. And the Toronto Star, the largest daily in Canada, the week that Google agreed to pay this fee, dropped their Defanging Big Tech investigative series and stopped talking about the tech platforms. You know, our friends on the right will tell us till they're blue in the face that incentives matter, unless you're rich, in which case apparently you can be an angel even if you're allowed to abuse your workers with impunity. But, you know, we should remember that incentives do matter from time to time, and this is a case where they really do.